Welcome to Jets Rehab. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Orlando Macchia. Orlando, how are you?
Russ, another disappointing season in the books, but nice to see you on the video for once. Looking good. How are you?
Yeah. And we have Mike Augello, who's representing the enemy today in the Buffalo Bills. Mike, how are you?
Well, the reason we're doing video is because I'm so handsome, but
Yeah, of course. I mean, everybody wants to see like the Titanic behind you.
yeah, that's true, which usually represents your team and my team at points.
Yeah,
So
at different points of the season. That's
exactly.
True. All right. So we're not going to, at least I don't plan on getting super statistical in this episode, but let's just, first off, Orlando, let's talk about the season's end. I think Woody Johnson did himself and the fan base a disservice by not at least inviting Sean Payton in for an interview to see what Sean Payton might have in mind for the Jets rather than what Robert Saleh has in mind for the Jets, because Robert Saleh lost out that season. They lost, the last 6 games. He puts out a shirt called Finish, which I don't think he realizes in a city like New York, when you don't finish and you were in playoff position and you had it in your own hands, what that looks like.
Yeah, enough with the slogans. I'll tell you that. But as for giving Sean Payton a call, the problem there is, one, it's the money. Woody's not going to pay big money for a coach. We know
he doesn't know that. You'll get invited in.
But two, there are other more appealing jobs out there. Even if he hitched his wagon to the Broncos with Wilson's albatross contract, you have to think that that's at least somewhat fixable. They've also got a good defense in place. They had a good receiving core, and it's the Walmart money. So the money's going to be a lot better there than the Jets. I do think if things go south with the Chargers in the playoffs here, I think that they would be more than happy to jettison Staley and to bring in Sean Payton and pay him big money as well. So there are other more appealing situations around the league. And I think something else, that goes to that is I think this, it's the first time now in 7-8 years where the Jets have some stability.
Yeah, but you have to make the Jets' job appealing. My basic point here is
I get that.
I don't know if Robert Saleh can win. Woody Johnson, if it's true that he was mad before the game, the Dolphins game, he should be pissed off after it. And the fact that he didn't even wait to say that Saleh may or may not be back. He was automatically back. Joe Douglas is automatically back. Listen, there's some problems with Joe Douglas too.
Yes, and I think that's finally been exposed in recent weeks in other media outlets too. It's like, look, he's whiffed a lot in free agency. Corey Davis was a swing and a miss. Laken Tomlinson was a disaster this year, right? You going back to Khalil, his first year here when he took over, and then that half a year after McCagnon brought in all the built the roster. But he's had some he's had some good free agent signings, and he's had a lot of misses. And there's as we've seen alluded to, like there's some bad contracts on this roster. Like he inherited Mosley, he made it worse to make the team fit. He backloaded a lot of these deals. You see Uzama's on the cap next year for over $10 million. He had 21 catches. He was a run blocker. They spent a lot.
I can't believe he's getting that much. It's ridiculous.
Because they backloaded the deals. Whitehead's on the books next year for over $10 million. What he did was
at least Whitehead can play his position.
Well, Whitehead, I like the signing, but Whitehead and Quincy Williams both were big points why that run defense really fell apart. Mm-hmm. And I had thought, something we'll talk about, but I initially thought it was after the Chicago game. Right. There was in that game, Montgomery, they had trouble tackling him at the point of attack. But it really started going back to that first New England game, the game that after the Michael Carter interception that really the season went off the rails after that. The Michael interception that got called back.
All right, so here's where I'm going to draw Mike in. So now we have the Quincy Williams situation, and there's always a situation with the Jets. Their best defensive players never get into conversations about money with Joe Douglas before they have to actually come out through their agents and threaten the Jets and say, well, we're not going to be here for OTAs unless you pay us. And this has happened I don't actually think every year that Joe Douglas has been here, but now it's happened to their best player of all of the other players. And look, we were hanging on to Jamal Adams and we were hanging on to Marcus May, but this is their best player. And Mike, this stuff used to happen in Buffalo, but it doesn't anymore.
Well, I'm waiting for him to get traded to Seattle for a first-round pick, like it happened. But this is the thing. It's like if you want a recipe for dysfunction, fire Saleh while keeping Douglas. You
Sure.
keep having the general manager, then being the guy carried over, has the coach. If you're gonna fire them, the t-shirt should be finished. ED, not
Well,
finished.
that's the reference I made on Twitter, because
Right.
I was like, what
Great
is he
minds.
saying on his shirt?
Great minds think alike. But
Yeah.
but see that, I mean, okay. From looking at my point of view, I don't think Saleh is the guy. But unless you give them one more year, and if it's a failure next year, you fire Douglas and you fire Saleh, and the new general manager comes in and hires his own coach. That at least if you hire the right GM, that's a recipe for success. I just see things right now as the Jets, up until the last 2 or 3 games of the regular season, had a defense that I think was playoff caliber. And they really sort of fell by the wayside late in the season when they really need. Now, giving up 9 points to Miami is not a disgrace, but they were playing against basically an XFL quarterback and Skylar Thompson. So, they needed to be better, and they weren't. But I just think right now it's like major dysfunction, starting from the quarterback to the coaching staff to decisions that they have to make. And I don't know whether I want Joe Douglas to make them, but unless you're prepared to fire him and fire everybody, you're stuck with what you got right now.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the year, Orlando, the Jets became like a complete systematic breakdown. So, like, as an example, in that game against Miami, the fact that Miami was going to go for a 59-yard field goal, and willingly, that would have been the best thing that could have happened in that game, because they would have missed the field goal, except the Jets had their punt defense on the field. And when they called the timeout, it gave Miami pause and realized, you know what, we're better off going for this. Let's go for this. And Miami has an inexperienced head coach. The Jets could have taken advantage of that situation, except the Jets head coach is not very good in crunch situations or clock management, for that matter.
No, and we saw that first in the Lions game when he left the 2 timeouts in his pocket after Elijah Moore made the catch on the 4th and 18, and all of a sudden Zerline has to try a 60-yard field goal. But then to be down to 1 timeout with 5-6 minutes into the third quarter, and again, as you alluded to, making like they were going to punt on 4th and 5, and then they just ran it right through them on the outside, which they did all day. They ran for 162 yards.
It was disgusting. Yeah.
Which, and their run defense, as we said, was pitiful, especially the last 3 games. But he made that decision for McDaniel, and I believe that drive led to 3 points.
Yeah, it did. And you don't want to say, like, I actually said on Twitter that was a turning point in the game. Now, in a stupid 9-6, 11, well, turned out to be 11-6 game, you don't want to say that because it's pathetic, but it actually was true, even though it was pathetic.
Yeah, it was pathetic. I mean, the whole game was pathetic. The fact that the Miami Dolphins, and I shouldn't say this because they're playing Buffalo and they'll probably find some way to beat the Bills, but the fact that the Miami Dolphins, with 3 quarterbacks, with their defense, which I think has been shown as being flawed, are in the playoffs is a little bit. I mean, they have great wide receivers. They have weapons. They just don't have anybody to get the ball to them. And I think that they trade for Bradley Chubb, and he was a complete stiff for this from the time that they made that deal. So I mean, the Jets have really just to bring it back to them, the Jets really have nobody to blame but themselves. Mm-hmm. The quarterback situation was handled terribly. I don't know what the hell Robert Saleh was thinking, putting in Mike White when he has 5,000 cracked ribs. Yeah. You play Flacco in that instance, or you play Wilson, but you don't go back to Mike White, who could barely raise his arm without pain. Which
that was a game they had to win, but they made that decision. It's again. So here we are, Orlando. I'll tell you. I don't know if I brought it up on the show before. I've told other people. At an event that I was at early in the year, I met a guy who's a writer for the Buffalo News, and he covers the Bills. And we started talking about him, and I just basically said, "Hey, what would happen? What would have happened to Josh Allen if he was on the Jets when he was having his footwork problem? Would that have been corrected? Do you think they would have fixed that?" And he said no. And that's what we're looking at with Zach Wilson. That's his biggest problem. But also, Mike LaFleur was a problem, because when he was losing faith in Zach Wilson, all of a sudden he wasn't setting him up to be in rollout situations or his strengths. He was trying to make him a pocket passer, and that's not what this guy can do for whatever he can do. And so, again, it's a complete breakdown, and really the Jets got scared down the end. They had the playoffs in their sights. I don't care. You can't say this is a year for house money. You can't say any of that, only because they had an easy path to the playoffs, frankly.
And had they beaten the Patriots that Sunday before Thanksgiving, their that game that was 10-3, their playoff chances would have been, I believe it was 78 or 80%, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
But they had a chance in excess of 60%, coming out of the bye week. And as you said, the thing went off the rails. It was the quarterback play, defense choking in some big spots. The whole thing was a disaster.
Explain to me why Robinson never got back in. He had some really good positive gains.
Yeah.
And he had injuries in the backfield. Like, this is even after Breece Hall. Like, look, if the Jets had Breece Hall, they probably would have made the playoffs, but they still could have made it without him. But Robinson offered something different that their other running backs didn't, and they basically shelved him.
Yeah, Robinson probably had he was a little more powerful, kind of dropped his shoulders, keep the legs churning. And I think, we saw that on that game-winning drive against Buffalo.
Yeah.
And when they started that drive at the 4-yard line. But it seemed to me, it's the same reason Michael Carter kind of got phased out of this offense, where he just lacked explosiveness. Like, they wanted to see that speed and quickness. And that's why, you see Bam Knight get elevated.
So wait, Anthony Johnson has speed and quickness? Come on, man.
But there's something there. The fact that was it. After the Minnesota game.
Uh-huh.
The Minnesota game, it was it. Like, he just disappeared.
Yeah, he disappeared after that.
And I don't think it was about the 45 yards for the draft pick. I mean, you're in a playoff hunt.
No.
You're not going to cut your nose off to spite your face. I think the coaching staff just thought, hey, he lacked a little explosiveness. Maybe he didn't look right. They thought he didn't look right after the knee injury. There was no report of an injury. He was unhappy about it. But so I just think they thought it wasn't a fit.
And they traded an asset for it. Like, it's just
6th-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying the 6th-round pick's a lot, but I'm saying it actually could have been a good trade if they used the guy. But, Mike, again, when teams are going bad, they make these bad decisions and they fall back on players who are mediocre players. And that's what the Jets did with the backfield, except for Bam Knight. I understand why they tried him.
And one of 3 or 4 different things happening gets the Jets in the playoffs. I mean, the obvious one is if Breece Hall doesn't blow out his knee, if he doesn't tear his ACL, they're in the playoffs.
Right.
If maybe they go to Mike White earlier, if they're just not happy with the progress of Zach Wilson, or they go with Flacco instead of Mike White in that game where White was hurt, they might be in the playoffs. I mean, and that's decision making on the part of the coaching staff, to an extent of the medical staff, but more the coaching staff. If the medical staff is telling them, "Oh, Mike White's fine," he's got 5 broken ribs. I don't care what flak jacket has been made. You're not gonna be at a 100% level if you're playing with multiple broken ribs. And even if Flacco is washed up, he's a better option than Mike White if Mike White was that debilitated. So I put that on Saleh, but I mean it sounds to me like that he's safe, and that the organization has decided they're going to bring Zach Wilson back. And I've heard this stuff where Woody Johnson is friendly with the Wilson family. So if that's the reason why, then there should be some mechanism to force Woody Johnson to sell the team because he's an idiot.
Well, there isn't. He's got all the money.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Zach Wilson will not take a snap for the Jets in 2023.
Yes, he will. That's the crazy part.
All right. We'll do a.
Orlando.
Is that what you're saying? I'll bet on it.
I was going to say I will. We'll make a wager for a pet shelter. How about
Okay.
that? We'll figure that out in the offseason. Wilson will not take a snap for the Jets next year.
I mean, Orlando. This is the thing that okay, they've invested a 2nd overall pick in the guy. He's dramatically unpopular in the New York media, in the New York area, because of what he said after that one loss. Do they sort of play it down the middle and go and get a veteran and try to continue to develop Zach Wilson? Would that be like the middle road that they go down? I mean, because otherwise it's like you blew a 3rd overall pick on Darnold. Now you've blown a 2nd overall pick on Wilson. How many failures at the top of the 1st round can you have?
And that's where this isn't. I'm sorry, and that's where this isn't acceptable anymore. And this goes back to taking Geno 9 years ago. And granted, he fell to the 2nd round. So for the last decade, the Jets have been chasing quarterbacks in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
They run into Fitzpatrick after Geno gets his jaw broken for owing somebody money. It works out well for the first year. They bring him back. McCown was a stopgap. And, so that was, a 3-year period where they were just kind of biding their time, hoping to find their franchise quarterback. They give up a ton of picks at a time where the roster was thin for Darnold. You whiff on a number 2 overall when now you're full of picks after the Adams trade. And that, now you're falling further behind the curve in that front. It's got to be a veteran. Me personally, I'm in on Derek Carr. Russ and I will disagree on that. If you ask
You
me
don't
right
know
now,
what I'm going to say, but go ahead. Keep going.
I have a feeling, but if you ask me who the quarterback is going to be in 23, it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo. And because one, he doesn't cost any assets. I'm not sure what the contract's going to look like. The market for quarterbacks has gone a bit haywire in recent years. It's going to be in excess, I would guess, of $30 million a year for sure. Likely with a significant guarantee, but he's injury prone. So when you're under a playoff mandate and you go to a guy like Garoppolo who's injury prone, now Zach Wilson gets fed to the wolves after what happened last year. I don't see that being possible. I think there's going to have to be another solution in place, or they're going to have to figure this out and bring in another backup. I don't know who it is. A guy like Heineke is going to cost too much money. They don't have.
I think Heineke's staying where he is, actually. So, all right. So first thing is, yes, of course I'll take that back because Zach Wilson will play. I don't want Derek Carr. Derek Carr has proven zilch to me in his NFL career. I don't care. See, this is the thing. I don't care about his yardage. I don't care about anything. I've seen him in positions where he needed to have a good game and he didn't. Garoppolo is not a great quarterback, but I'll take him over Derek Carr. And the reason you're going to lose your bet is because when they have Garoppolo, he will get hurt and Zach Wilson will come in. That's where you're going to, so you better think twice about this bet. That's all I'm telling you. I don't want to sound like, your uncle who's trying to give you good advice. I'll gladly take this bet though. At any rate, I think Garoppolo is the better guy. And you know what? At that point, there's no reason to get rid of Wilson because again, if Garoppolo gets hurt and Wilson comes in, he does great. Okay, you spent a lot of money on quarterback that year. You make sure this contract is one you can get out of in a year or two with a fair amount of money in case Wilson does develop. If he doesn't, you have Garoppolo. I think that's what they have to do. It's the only fair thing to do for the guys on the defense, only because if you bring in Mike White and Wilson, the guys on the defense are going to be pissed off. And you're not going to get the most out of them. But as far as the coaching staff, yeah, LaFleur's got to be gone. I'm a little older than you guys, so when I went to the University of Houston, a guy who was starring in Texas A&M was Gary Kubiak. I always heard about Gary Kubiak. I watched him in games then because it was a rival, right? Houston, A&M, that's a rival. And Kubiak is a pretty good offensive mind. Maybe he wasn't the best head coach, but he knows offense. And he sat behind Elway, and he knows the game. I would feel much more confident if they went out and got a Kubiak because at least that's a known guy who's dealt with big-time quarterbacks, and maybe even he could help Wilson. Like LaFleur, unfortunately, he might have the best playbook in the league, but he never uses it. So I don't care. I'm done with him.
Yeah, and earlier in the season, we talked about I had no issues because especially when he had Breece Hall, it felt like he was creative using 2-back sets.
Yeah, and Breece Hall makes everybody look good.
Right, but I felt like he was a lot more creative, whereas once Hall went down, the run game struggled. There was a lot of just, all right, let's just run up the middle, or hey, run a stretch. It was very basic, and he got away from it quick. It wasn't working, and that was it. He just abandoned it, which was problematic and made me rethink. My only thing with canning him and bringing in new offensive coordinators, this is the problem. That Saleh and Douglas are going to be out if there is a repeat of last year, or they don't make the playoffs. If there's no substantial progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
What quality candidate are you going to get? Because would Gary Kubiak come in here and say, "Yeah, I'll be the offensive coordinator"?
Well, he could also be the interim coach too if things go awry. That's the beauty of bringing in Kubiak.
Well, and I know he's been out of. I think he's been out of the game for a little while. I know,
he had a heart condition or something, right?
He had. I believe that was with the Texans. He was with
Denver. So you know what? You whisper in his ear and say, "Gary, things don't work out. We'll get you in there, and you could try it out."
Well, something else I had seen thrown about, and this is something, going back to 2 years ago after the tragedy with Greg Knapp, they never brought in that adult in the room, and it was a very green staff.
Right.
So an idea would be appealing, even using a North Turner. He'd been out of football for a couple of years now. He was with the Panthers a few years back. But like you said, a guy like Kubiak or a guy like North Turner to come in here and
I would
collaborate with the floor and work with
nothing against North Turner. I think he's just too far in the past. That's why I'd rather have Kubiak. But I get what you're saying. Like, like if you all of a sudden say to me, Dave Wannstedt, I'm going to just end the call. Like, I'm going to stop this.
I was going to say Ted Marchabrota, but I actually, the guy in a Buffalo connection here, but Frank Reich was a fine offensive coordinator with Philadelphia. Now obviously he's out of a job after getting fired by Indianapolis, but the way that team and that situation was, I think it makes him look better because it was completely dysfunctional, and the whole Jeff Saturday thing made him look like a joke. Maybe he's somebody who wants to get back into it, but I do think that if they do fire LaFleur, Saleh's probably going to go with somebody from the 49ers tree.
Yeah, tough. You know what? This is where Douglas has to understand preservation here. And you know what, Robert, I've given you a lot of leeway here. We don't have any leeway left here. It's your job, my job on the line. So I can't do that. I get what you're saying about Reich. I bring him in. I think his magic is gone personally, but I bring him in.
But Douglas knows him from Philadelphia.
Right.
So, I mean, there is that connection there.
Why you bring in Nick Foles too?
As a backup?
As anything, I don't want Nick Foles. So
okay. Maybe your backup will be Carson Wentz if they bring in.
Oh yeah,
no.
He was MVP for half the season, and then All right, one last thing about the Jets that's kind of laughable. So they've never been able to fill the tight end position, not through the whole time Douglas has been here, and even before that. But I even have Eagles fans chirping me that, well, we've had tight ends. It's like, yeah, you also had Howie Roseman. It's not like, Joe Douglas operated alone in Philly. So the funniest thing was, and I told this to Orlando, I said when the Jets drafted Jeremy Ruckert, and I have no idea why they did this with a 3rd round pick, mind you. I said, this kid is from Lindenhurst, and I'm telling you right now, somebody who works in the Jets front office is related to this guy somehow or went to high school with him, and they are just drafting him just because, right? So we go through the season. I remember even at the time, Orlando was like, well, listen, he could be a good blocker. Maybe he's a project. I know he's a project. And he made a catch in the Miami game, and I did a slow clap because that was his one catch of the season. Like, that was it. He had one goddamn catch this year, and you wasted a 3rd round pick on that, Orlando.
Now, at least the run blocking looked better than what we'd seen down the stretch, especially on some of the old San Francisco motion, pull the tight end around and steal the edge. We saw a couple of those on the tape, at least on the highlights. But that's something that was inexplicable. Then you look at the guys that brought in, as we said, they spent a lot of money on Uzama, who's predominantly run blocker. He was a focal point of the offense in one game, the game against the Lions, where he had the 2 touchdowns, including the bomb that Wilson had thrown downfield in the first half. Those was only 2 touchdowns of the year. He really wasn't involved at all in the offense until the second half of the season. At least felt that way.
Right.
And Conklin was a bit of giveth and taketh. Like, you look at the raw stats with the 58 catches, 552.
He get like 2 yards a catch.
But he was a reliable kind of inside the numbers in some of those short yards. But then the drops and the fumbles. People want to say Conklin had a good year. Conklin had a very up and down, frustrating year.
When he was good,
serviceable.
I'll tell you when he was good. When it's 3rd and 12 and he's going to catch a 5-yard pass, that's a lot of his stats because they're not covering him because they know that he can't get past the 1st down marker. Yeah. So they're garbage stats to me.
I think I agree in the sense that the stats look a little better than what he gave you this year.
Yeah.
So that is, it's still it's the long term a position of need. But again, the way those contracts are structured, that's your tight end room next year. Uzama, Conklin, Ruckert. Maybe they bring in maybe there's another developmental pick or a guy they bring in off the guy they bring in free agency to maybe just be a predominantly run blocker. I don't know, but that looks like it's going to be your tight end room in 2023.
Russ, I heard Mickey Schuler is available.
Yeah, listen, Russ Francis, if he's around, I mean, I'm willing.
Pete Metzelaars has been.
Metzelaars, I have a big hate for because he was a big oaf, but he would get open once in a while.
Yes.
So, all right. So we'll switch to the Bills, Mike. And the Jets did beat them this year, which is crazy to think about. as considering how their season ended, but
Well,
tell me what your confidence level is in the Bills.
well, I was just going to say, I compared the loss to the Jets this year to the loss that they had last year to Jacksonville with Urban Meyer as the coach. It shouldn't have happened. With and it was mostly on the Jets defense being able to keep the Bills out of the end. I think the Bills drove down on the first drive, and then they'd had 10 points the rest of the game, and they couldn't stop the run.
Yeah.
So that was, and obviously now with them only playing 16 games and having 3 losses and one of them being to the Jets, that was debilitating to them, because had they won that game, they would have had home field advantage. Now,
Right.
instead, it's going to be a neutral site if it's them in
At
Kansas
least the
City.
Jets did something. Had something.
Yes, in your mind, they did something. They beat the Bills. But you're talking to somebody who has the scar tissue of being a Bills fan for most of my life, and obviously going through the 4 Super Bowl losses. And, the last thing I wanted to hear at the beginning of the year was the Bills being the overwhelming favorite.
Right.
Because that, to me, that was just like the kiss of death. I look at it realistically. They lost Micah Hyde early in the season, a Pro Bowl safety. They lost Von Miller to the ACL injury. Allen seems to finally finally be bouncing back from the elbow injury he had against the Jets earlier in the year, but then apparently hurt his ankle in the Cincinnati game, so he wasn't running around like he normally does against New England. Put all that together, I think that they're going to beat Miami, even if Tua plays, and we don't know about that. But Cincinnati as a second round match, even if it's in Buffalo, is a tough out, because Cincinnati is really good and they're hot.
Yeah.
And then, they already beat Kansas City once, and Kansas City in the playoffs, they're voodoo. So do I have any confidence that the Bills are going to make the Super Bowl? No. I will be pleasantly surprised that they do, but it's possible. There is a path. If Cincinnati loses to Baltimore, if Kansas City loses to, the Chargers or something like that, they could make the Super Bowl, but they're going to need some luck in terms of their opposition.
I think that's fair. I mean, Orlando, I still think Kansas City's looking too good down the stretch to not get back there. But what's your thoughts on the Bills and their path? And do you believe in Cincy?
Well, going into the season, I had said, the only team that could beat Buffalo is themselves. Like especially if you look the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, like they were absolute world beaters. The offense was on fire. You saw in the second half as they integrated James Cook. I believe he led the league in yards per carry. And that was a welcoming sight for a team that had really struggled to run the football in recent years. Defensively, getting Jordan Poyer back, I think, was huge after he missed a couple of games there. And that they had that little stretch where they lost 2 back-to-back to Minnesota and the Jets. Getting Poyer back, I think, helped stabilize that defense some. So when it comes to like my favorite in the AFC, I guess the thing that concerns me about Cincinnati is their inability to run the football.
Right.
That's going to be something. You got to wear defenses down in late in games when you have a 8 to 10, 7 to 10 point lead. You have to be able to control the clock and keep your defense off the field. I hate to be the chalk here, but I think we're gonna get a neutral site AFC title game between Kansas City and Buffalo. If you ask me right now, I'm going Chiefs 49ers in the Super Bowl, but so KC out of the AFC.
So where would the neutral site be? I think that's an interesting thing, because I heard like they were looking at Indy. I hope it's not Vegas. I think Vegas.
No, the report that came out this morning, and it's not confirmed yet, but the report is Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Atlanta. And of course, they're saying, well, because it's a major transportation hub. Yeah, unless the computer, the FAA shuts down every plane flying out because of the computer screw up that happened today. But it is a major hub for Delta, so it'd be able, people would be able to get to that game. It is a dome. It is not in a cold weather situation. I mean, the 3 names that came out were Pittsburgh, which would be outdoor, Indianapolis, and Atlanta.
I think Indy's a better choice. Honestly.
I think so too, but apparently maybe there's some in
Atlanta's got terrible traffic. Indianapolis does not.
But here's the thing: the NFL has to ask the team and whether they want to host it or not. And the preliminary stuff out there is that Indianapolis doesn't want to host it.
Yeah,
So if that's
their owner's not the greatest guy.
yeah, so
I'm
I
with
mean,
you on that.
Atlanta has hosted national championship college football games. It's a nice and brand new building, and it's a dome. And I think in the end, Orlando, I think they want to be in a dome. They don't want to move this game someplace like Pittsburgh and then have a
Yeah.
blizzard happen.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Right. It's one thing if it's in Buffalo or Kansas City. And where I think Atlanta is the best option, if Indy says no, is no one's going to have a travel advantage.
Right.
It's not in a close proximity to either of those teams in hypothetical Buffalo or Kansas City matchup.
Right.
And also in researching Atlanta, because I was going to go to the Jets Falcons game last year before it went to London. That was one of those fly in, fly out, and you can actually they have a rail service, a mass transit that goes right from the airport to the stadium.
Right.
So yeah, I had taken a look at that, at least from what I gathered. So it's something that it's in close proximity to the airport. It's something easy in and out. We can get fans in. The Bills fans will travel well to Atlanta, regardless. So
it's always been cheap to fly to Atlanta. Like I went to the '99 playoffs in Atlanta, and again, Atlanta fans were so bad back then. The Braves fans that it was against the Mets, and I got tickets off Ticketron, and I went AirTran, who doesn't even exist anymore. And I'm there, so I get it. I get that's probably, sort of the process now. So, all right, if it's in Atlanta, I can live with that. I did want to bring up the Eagles because I'm in the market. I think it's they're in a weird spot now. I'll explain. I have a dad who's going to be 90 next year. Now, he was a Jets fan his whole life. He moved here and he slowly became an Eagles fan. It was sort of like this sickness that came over him and just took over his brain.
It's football Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And by, his fourth year here, he was an Eagles fan. And so I'm chatting with him yesterday about it. And he's worried because of the Jalen Hurts injury. And I don't blame him because he's like, look, the Giants had the second string quarterback in. Orlando and I chatted about this early in the week that they weren't going to play really anybody. And look, I don't think the Eagles struggled, but Jalen Hurts didn't look great. And I don't think they gave their all either, the Eagles, but they wanted to win so they can get their home field. So they did that. But I do think it's problematic with Jalen Hurts because I think Orlando, with that injury, he's not going to be able to run either because they're not going to risk him getting hurt on the field and Minshew all of a sudden being in the playoff game. So with that and Lane Johnson playing with a sports hernia, which I don't understand, I do think they're in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, and the Eagles are, to me, in the same boat as the Cowboys, where it's going to be, you're going to have to prove me wrong for me to pick you.
Right.
I think Howie Roseman knocked it out of the park in the offseason. He's absolutely the executive of the year, right?
Hey, A.J. Brown, come on.
Yeah.
A.J. Brown's been phenomenal. I mean, C.J. Gardner-Johnson before the injury was great. You look at the trade year prior for Darius Slay. He's done a really nice job.
Although Slay's been lazy or bad lately.
See, I love Slay.
No, but not lately. I'm just telling you.
I mean, so to me, again, I'm going to have to be proven wrong, or they're going to have to prove me wrong. It's just they're not going to be the team that I take to go to the NFC to win out in the NFC. I would still take the Niners over them in Philly. I know that they have Purdy, but they're rolling right now. Their defense is also phenomenal, and he does just enough. They don't. It's not going to be too complicated for him. They just give him simple throws. That's why.
The funny thing is that the top, I mean, I agree with San Francisco. They just seem to be going with the guy who's Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft. They're a system, and McCaffrey's playing great, and they have Kittle, and they have, so I think they're the favorite based on the way Philadelphia has sort of fallen by the wayside the last couple weeks at the end of the regular season. But Minnesota, for a 13-win team, is a joke.
They're not a great 13.
They're not a great team. I give the Giants a chance to actually beat them, and if that happens, then I think it's Giants Philly in the divisional round, because the Giants are the 6th seed,
which would be very interesting. Because I'm going to tell you something that was happening here, and we only have like 3 minutes left, so I'll make it quick. But I was listening to like Howard Eskin on. And it wasn't by choice. I just turned on the radio because I did that. And on WIP, and they were whining if Daniel Jones was actually going to play in this game last week, because that could hurt the Eagles' chances of winning. All of a sudden, they used to make fun of Daniel Jones. Now they're afraid of Daniel Jones. And I got to tell you something. The way he's playing, I might be afraid of Daniel Jones in that game. I might be.
if he plays Minnesota the way he did on Christmas Eve, I mean, with we're doing it with Isaiah Hodgins. And they had torched Patrick Peterson inside between. I watched that game. It was the best I've ever seen Daniel Jones play. And they did it. At parts of the game, they did a nice job keeping Cousins out of that moving pocket. Like I'm with you, Mike. I think the Giants have a real shot there.
And Saquon was hurt at the end of the season. They gave him the day off against Philadelphia. I mean, he'll be fresh. And you say Isaiah Hodgins. This is a guy that they picked off the Bills practice squad, and he's a player. I mean, there were a lot of people around here who said, "Why did the Bills cut him?" And he went back through waivers and went to the practice squad before the Giants picked him up. He's a good receiver.
The Jets, the Giants, inexplicably, and I've told this to some people in Philly because growing up in New York, I've seen it. They've been able to just have magical seasons that didn't seem like they were going to be there. And if they start getting on a roll in the playoffs, I would be worried if the Eagles had to play them too. I'm just saying, I don't know if it'll happen, but I do kind of agree. I think it's going to be 49ers and the Chiefs. I think, if that's the Super Bowl, that would be a good Super Bowl. All this is fun stuff. It's not fun for Jet fans. Mike, it'll be fun for you for a couple of weeks, and then who knows?
Well, I don't know about how much fun it'll be. I'll be biting my fingernails and throwing things against the wall if things go the wrong way when they play. Because we don't know what's going to happen with Tua. I think it would be gross.
I don't think he's playing. I don't.
Yeah, I would think. I think it would be gross irresponsibility on the part of the Miami Dolphins to play a guy who's been concussed 3 times, who staggered like a drunk when they played Buffalo early in the season because he was concussed, and it's been 2 times after that. If they actually play him, I mean, I don't know.
It was 2 times after. I thought it was just 2 in total.
No, he's had 3. Okay. He's had 3 concussions.
Wow.
So and just the evidence of him, high-fiving his teammates meant that he's going to be in the lineup for the playoff game. Give me a break. I mean, it's either going to be Bridgewater with a broken finger or Thompson, and if that's the case, then I think the Bills will win. If it's Tua and he's healthy, then they have a chance.
All right, Orlando. Any final thought?
Yeah, I'm taking Buffalo in a route either way.
Okay.
And it's Tua, even that Saturday night game when they played Buffalo, Tua, they have those 2 primetime games in a row, the Chargers and the Bills. Tua had that 3-game stretch where he was atrocious, just missing guys. Well, not unlike him. So you're not, obviously, as you said, you're not getting him. It's either Bridgewater, broken finger, Skylar Thompson. We saw the ineptitude of their passing game against the Jets. To me, I'll go Buffalo 31-9.
My favorite part of the Dolphins Jet game last week was they showed Dan Marino on screen, and the guys calling the game were so occupied with calling the game, they never acknowledged Dan Marino, which made my heart sing. And it was just really funny because that was their opportunity to say something about Dan Marino and the great Dolphins teams, and nothing. They said nothing.
Are you sure it wasn't an Isotoner gloves commercial?
Yeah, as long as they didn't show Larry Zonka too. Anyhow, that's it. That's it for Jets Rehab. Catch everybody next time.
Thanks for listening, everybody.